What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home here at fakepigskin.com. I am your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me once again, it's Brian Twining. Brian Twining, before we are here today, obviously we're gonna talk some Matthew Stafford. We're gonna talk some Jared Goff. We're gonna talk a quarterback on the move. We'll obviously have all kinds of stuff to talk about too. Eventually, if Deshaun Watson gets moved, if other quarterbacks start making moves. So we'll try and jump in as stuff happens and give you a kind of our quick take, our initial reaction, just see where our head's at. And obviously, as free agency rolls along, as the draft happens, all that stuff, we'll be able to kind of figure out a more clear picture. But before we do all that, I want to mention that we are diving headfirst back into NASCAR again this year. If you like NASCAR, make sure you are subscribing. Make sure you turn on that bell notification. Brian and I just did a video breaking down the kind of the season outlook, drivers on the move, a few things to consider, as well as an early look at Daytona odds. We'll be back next week with a full breakdown of Daytona, our best bets for that, as well as, if you're watching this, hopefully you've already seen our Super Bowl preview, but we're going to be doing that. We're talking props. We'll be talking our plays for the game, all that good stuff. But with that being said, Brian, let's jump into it. Let's talk about the fantasy impact of the Matthew Stafford for Jared Goff deal. Obviously, from an NFL perspective, we can see those 2 first-round picks with Jared Goff, how much of an impact that can make. In theory, the Rams could be much better next year. That those draft picks are still aren't great. They're going to be mid to late first rounders, but it still feels like a lot to give up. I know you're getting Jared Goff in his salary, but they could easily get out of there after 2 years, about 30 million, 15 per. I mean, a lot of quarterbacks, way below Jared Goff's standard are going to be going for that. But from a fantasy perspective, let's talk about this deal, and let's talk about the Matthew Stafford side. He's obviously going to the Rams, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, the tight ends. But this was a team that really came together with Cam Akers with that defense, and made a run in the playoffs. Obviously, one in Seattle, then went to Green Bay. Never really got there, but felt like if Aaron Donald was healthy, maybe things are a little different. Going into next season, what are your expectations for Stafford from a fantasy perspective? And I'm thinking Cam Akers defense. From a fantasy perspective, are we going to potentially overrate him and bump him up? Or where do you think he's at?
I mean, from a pure fantasy perspective, Matthew Stafford has always kind of been a darling in the fantasy community, as somebody that we kind of expected to blow the doors off of the league in terms of, touchdowns and yardage. I mean, when you look at his career, he's pretty much averaged about 550 plus attempts per season, but that was playing for a Detroit Lions team who their defense was never really up to par in that division. They were constantly losing games, forcing Stafford to have to throw the ball a ton. They've never had a consistent running game. And even this season with the drafting of DeAndre Swift, we still saw them, have to kind of go to that pass first style of offense because they were trailing quite often. Going over to the Rams, this is an offense where towards the back end of this season, probably because of the injury to Jared Goff and with Walford playing quarterback, they kind of went extreme run heavy and they started to play off the run a little bit more. But the fact that Jared Goff is not the best when it comes to getting the ball down the field, and now you're going to have this quarterback who has this extremely strong arm, these deep in routes and all these like 15 plus yard slants and stuff that McVay likes to run with this system. I think Stafford is going to have a nice ceiling here, being that we kind of thought Jared Goff was going to be one of those sleeper guys in terms of their ability to run an efficient passing offense. And if they're able to protect Stafford and give him time in the pocket, he's going to be able to hit those windows that Goff was unable to because of a lack of arm strength.
Yeah, no, we were optimistic about both of these guys heading into the year. And obviously, I'm going to jump into some early best balls and that kind of stuff to see where the ADP is falling on these guys. Because obviously, if I can get Jared Goff Matthew Stafford in the 12 to 15, 18 among quarterbacks, like I'll be very excited about that. But if people get way too optimistic about him, because I think, I'm looking at Jared Goff's numbers the past couple of years, 550 to 600 attempts doesn't feel out of the realm of possibilities. Obviously, as you mentioned, when your quarterback's banged up or you're using John Wolford, you're going to run it a little bit more. But if this offense is as efficient as it can be, if Stafford is hitting the routes, I could see games where they're throwing a lot less as the game rolls along, a lot more Cam Akers, and maybe he's closer to 520 attempts. Now he could be incredibly, efficient with that. He could be putting up touchdowns. He could be having night, but 4,500 yards and 32 touchdowns versus maybe closer to 5,000 yards, that kind of stuff. I think you have to kind of, marginalize expectations a little bit, but if he's healthy and he can play 16 games and he can throw it 500 times, obviously the upside is there. Without the rushing ability, I might be a little less inclined to go that way, especially if his ADP gets pushed up.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. In looking at this in terms of purely fantasy, I actually kind of like Jared Goff slightly more than Matthew Stafford going into next year, which sounds absolutely ridiculous, but he's going to be going into a situation where, yes, the draft picks are not the greatest landing spot, but they're going to have a lot of cap room to make some moves on the outside, get some targets for Jared Goff. We saw that offensive line start to play really well, towards the back half of the season. They were trying to get the running game going. They have an extremely talented running back in the aforementioned Swift now. And if they're able to lock up Kenny Galladay, because why are they going to let Mini Megatron walk? Jared Goff has proven he's an okay quarterback when he's healthy, and you can't let the last few games of his career with the Rams affect the way we looked at him coming into the season, being he had a broken thumb on his throwing hand. I mean, Nobody's going to be an accurate passer when you're dealing with something like that, unless you're Brett Favre, of course. Who wasn't accurate to begin with.
The whole Brett Favre, Deshaun Watson thing has me laughing so much. Like, how are you gonna talk about a quarterback leaving teams when you were had a whole offseason of, was he retiring? Is he coming out of retirement? Is he gonna play? Is he on the Jets? Is he on the Vikings? Calm down. This is a quarterback before last season, 4,600 yards back-to-back seasons. 2018 at 32 touchdowns. I'm going to be curious to see, because both Kenny Galladay and Marvin Jones are free agents. They could easily end up elsewhere. If they're smart, they get some more possession type receivers that can really fit into a run, play action. Obviously, TJ Hawkinson's going to be great for Jared Goff. But I'm excited about him. His potential. Obviously, we're gonna have to see where the chips fall, as you mentioned. If Kenny Galladay is back, if they're able to add a receiver or two opposite Kenny G, they could do some serious things. There's some interesting options in the draft as well. Maybe they get a guy that can kind of pop up as that third option. We'll see. And as I mentioned, Hawkinson has really made strides in his first two seasons. Could make a ton of sense. And DeAndre Swift out of the backfield as a pass catcher is really impressive. So, I don't really know what to make of Dan Campbell. He's he's a little out there, but Mike Vrabel was talking about cutting his dick off to win the Super Bowl. So, you never know what you're going to get. But I do think it was interesting. I do think that the Jared Goff slander is a little aggressive, and very curious to see where Stafford and kind of his fantasy expectations fall, because I could see people getting really excited about him and kind of pumping him up a little too high, and all of a sudden he's in that 5 to 7 range, and I'm just not going to be paying that at quarterback.
Yeah, I really like Matthew Stafford. I mean, he's one of the most talented quarterbacks that we've seen over the last 10, 12 years coming to the NFL in terms of arm talent and stuff like that. But I mean, he has a high propensity of throwing interceptions. He makes some interesting decisions in terms of where he's throwing the ball to. I that I think that's probably my only worry is whether or not he's able to adapt to the system of Sean McVay and kind of get out of that old school kind of gunslinger mentality that he had in Detroit.
Yeah.
Because like that's why we all thought Jared Goff fit perfectly in that Rams system, was because he would play the system and he wasn't going to be forcing very many balls. But I'm excited to see that with Stafford in this Rams offense, especially if they get that running game turning the way they did. And I did want to mention, I thought it was interesting that Teddy Bruschi, I think it was either today or yesterday, said that Jared Goff wasn't tough enough to play in New England. And that's, to me, is kind of crazy to say when the dude was playing with a broken thumb.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a guy who's basically played 16 games every year since 2011 before last year. I am curious to see how that back holds up, but 1 year in. But yeah, I mean, that I don't understand. Like Patriots, former Patriots are so like sensitive about Belichick, and I think the Matt Patricia experience like really left him with a sour taste in his mouth and something he didn't want to deal with going forward. And he's like, I don't want any more of that. I don't want, and we'll see. We'll see if, I'm really excited to see what his potential could be. As you mentioned, if he plays in more structure, if he's playing in a system where, they're able to be up and not having to, play down by 30 in the second quarter, like, is he a lot more consistent? Is he not throwing as many jump balls? Will his, he's had success with guys like Danny Amendola. So, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, not having to throw it up to Megatron or Kenny G. How will that affect him? How will that, impact his potential? But I'm excited about it. I think it'll be interesting. But like I said, if people get too aggressive, too crazy, on his draft day, cost, I'll probably be out. Like I think, I want to get him close to double digit rounds as a quarterback. And if I feel like if I'm drafting a QB high, if I'm drafting in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, I need that rushing floor every week, whether it's Kyler, whether it's Lamar, whether it's Josh Allen.
How quickly we forget about the QB1, Dak Prescott.
Yeah, well, he's going to look really good in San Francisco. So we'll but yeah, as Dak figures it out, if Deshaun gets traded, as we got Senior Bowl just finished. We got the combine coming up. We got all the draft prep. We got all the free agency stuff. So as this stuff pops up, we'll be back. We'll be here to break it down, give you our fantasy impact. Hopefully, get some guests to join us along the way. As I mentioned, Brian and I are going to hop over now and talk about the Super Bowl from a betting angle. We're going to hit some props. We're going to hopefully make some money this weekend. And then we'll be back here with NASCAR each and every week, previewing the races, telling you about the drivers we like, both from a betting and DFS angle. So if you enjoy that, make sure you come check it out. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you turn on the bell notification. Make sure you, all that good stuff. For Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert. We'll talk to y'all next time.